The first RPG hit the lead Humvee before anyone heard it coming. Staff Sergeant Yara Okonkwo was already moving when the second explosion turned the world to fire and screaming metal. 37 Rangers trapped on a single road. Mountains rising on both sides like the walls of a grave. And somewhere in the ridges above them, enemy fighters who had turned this valley into a kill box. But what the men scrambling for cover did not know, what Captain Harlan had refused to believe when he dismissed her 6 hours ago, was that Yara had been waiting for a moment exactly like this her entire career. Before we dive deeper into this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you are watching from. Maybe you know someone who served in Afghanistan and faced moments like this. 6 hours earlier, the morning sun had been almost peaceful at FOB Restrepo. Yara had stepped off the supply helicopter with her rifle case and her orders, and within 30 seconds she had known this deployment would be a fight before she ever saw the enemy. Captain Victor Harlan had been waiting on the landing zone. 32 years old, West Point ring catching the light, jaw set like a man who had already made up his mind. He had looked at her orders, looked at her, and his expression had said everything his words would spend the next 5 minutes confirming. "You are the sniper they sent me," he had said. It was not a question. Staff Sergeant Okonkwo reporting as ordered, "Sir." Harlan had folded the orders without reading past the first paragraph. "I requested a sniper team. They sent me one staff sergeant. One female staff sergeant." Yara had kept her voice level. "I am qualified to operate independently, sir. Top of my class at Fort Benning. 3 deployments. I can provide effective overwatch for your operations." Harlan had smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm sure you can, Staff Sergeant. But my Rangers have been operating in this valley for 4 months. They do not need a publicity stunt watching their backs. You will ride in the vehicle convoy tomorrow. Stay with the Humvees. Try not to get in the way." He had walked away before she could respond. Around her, Rangers had watched the exchange with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed amusement. The message was clear. She was tolerated, not welcomed. An outsider assigned to the most dangerous valley in Afghanistan by people who had never set foot in it. That night, Yara had found Specialist Terrence Kimura sitting alone behind the motor pool, hands shaking as he tried to write a letter home. He was 22, fresh from Ranger School, and tomorrow would be his first mission outside the wire. The fear on his face was something Yara recognized. She had worn it herself once a lifetime ago. She had sat down beside him without asking permission. "First time is always the worst," she had said. Kimura had looked up, surprised that anyone was talking to him. Surprised that she was talking to him. "Everyone says it gets easier," he had said. "Does it?" "No, you just get better at carrying it." They had sat in silence for a while. Then Yara had done something she rarely did. She had talked. She had told him about her first deployment, about the fear that had nearly frozen her, about the moment she had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else mattered more. By the time she finished, Kimura's hands had stopped shaking. "Thank you, Staff Sergeant," he had said. Yara had stood to leave. "Tomorrow, stay low, move fast, and trust your training. Your body knows what to do. Just get out of its way." Now, 6 hours later, she watched Kimura dive behind a burning Humvee as machine gun fire stitched the ground where he had been standing. The Rangers were pinned, scattered across 200 meters of road, with no cover and enemies on every high point. 3 men were already down. Medevac was 20 minutes out. Air support was 25. Captain Harlan was screaming into his radio from behind an engine block, calling for fire support that was not coming, trying to coordinate a response to an ambush that had been designed to be unsurvivable. Yara pulled her rifle from the damaged vehicle where Harlan had ordered her to stay. The SR-25 was still intact, scope still zeroed. She looked up at the ridgeline, at the muzzle flashes winking like evil stars, and she began to move toward the only high ground on their side of the valley. A sergeant grabbed her arm as she passed. "Where the hell are you going?" Captain said stay with the vehicles. Yara pulled free. "The captain is wrong." She ran. Bullets snapped past her, kicking up dust, but she had learned long ago that running targets were hard to hit, and scared shooters always aimed where you were, not where you were going. She reached the rocks at the base of the ridge and began to climb. It took her 4 minutes to reach a position with sight lines to the enemy. For minutes of burning lungs and torn palms, and the constant crack of gunfire below. When she finally settled into a stable shooting position and pressed her eye to the scope, her breath caught. She counted the muzzle flashes. 43. 43 enemy fighters with elevation advantage against 37 Rangers trapped in a valley with no cover and no support. Captain Harlan was still screaming that everything was under control. Yara chambered around. Everything was not under control, but it was about to be. The night before the mission, Yara had studied the maps until her eyes burned. The Korengal Valley was a nightmare drawn in topographic lines. Steep ridges, limited sight lines, 100 places where patient men with rifles could wait for Americans to walk into their graves. She had seen the route Captain Harlan planned to take, and she had known immediately that it was suicide without proper overwatch. She had requested a meeting. Harlan had granted her 5 minutes. Sir, the route to Darbart village passes through a natural choke point at grid reference 479er, she had said, pointing to the map spread across his desk. If I position on the eastern ridge before the convoy moves, I can provide overwatch for the entire approach. Any ambush will be visible from that elevation. Harlan had not looked at the map. He had looked at her. Staff Sergeant, I have been running operations in this valley since before you finished sniper school. My Rangers know this terrain. We do not need a single shooter on a ridge pretending to be useful. With respect, sir, a single shooter in the right position can neutralize an ambush before it begins. That is what snipers do. That is why I am here. You are here because someone at battalion thinks putting women in combat roles makes good press. Harlan had leaned back in his chair. You want to know why I requested no female attachments? Because my men need to focus on the enemy, not on protecting someone who should not be here. The words had landed like blows, but Yara had not flinched. She had heard variations of this speech before, from drill sergeants who thought she would wash out, from instructors who gave her the hardest assignments hoping she would fail, from commanders who looked at her and saw a problem instead of an asset. I do not need protection, sir. I need a position where I can do my job. Your job tomorrow is vehicle security. Dismissed. She had left his office knowing that arguing further would only make things worse. But she had also left knowing something Harlan did not. She had looked at that map and seen the ambush coming. She had seen it as clearly as if the enemy had drawn it themselves. And when it happened, she would be ready. Now, pressed against Afghan rock with her rifle steadied on a natural rest, Yara proved herself right in the worst possible way. The first target was an RPG team reloading for another shot at the convoy. 900 meters. Wind from the east at maybe 5 knots. Yara made the adjustments automatically, her hands moving with the precision of 10,000 practice rounds. She exhaled half a breath, found the stillness between heartbeats, and squeezed. The shooter dropped. His partner looked around in confusion, trying to understand what had happened. Yara was already shifting to her second target. 850 meters. Machine gun position raking the road where Kimura's squad was pinned. She could see the young specialist pressed flat against the dirt, rounds impacting inches from his head. 3 seconds, and he would be dead. 2 seconds. 1. The machine gunner slumped over his weapon. The gun went silent. Kimura looked up, not understanding why he was still alive, and scrambled for better cover. Below, the Rangers were starting to notice. Someone was shooting back. Someone with accuracy that did not match the chaos of the ambush. Sergeant First Class Royce, the senior NCO, pressed his radio to his ear and scanned the ridgelines. Who the hell is providing overwatch? He shouted into the net. I thought we had no sniper support. We do not, came Harlan's voice, strained with pain and fury. Whoever is shooting is acting without authorization. Yara ignored the radio traffic bleeding from the headset around her neck. Authorization meant nothing when men were dying. Regulations meant nothing when the enemy had every advantage. She found her third target, a spotter directing mortar fire, and sent him tumbling down the rocks. 4, 5, 6. Each shot bought the Rangers below another few seconds of survival. Each body that fell was one less gun pointed at Americans. Yara worked with mechanical efficiency, shifting between targets, calculating windage and elevation, making the mathematics of death look effortless. But the enemy was not stupid. After the sixth kill, the muzzle flashes on the far ridge began to shift. They were looking for her now. They had realized that someone was methodically dismantling their ambush, and they wanted that someone dead. A bullet cracked past Yara's head, close enough that she felt the shock wave against her cheek. Then another, sparking off the rocks to her left. She rolled to a new position, heart pounding, and forced herself to breathe. They had spotted her, or at least they had spotted her general area. The next few minutes would determine whether she lived long enough to make a difference. The radio crackled with Harlan's voice, somehow even angrier than before. Whoever is firing from that ridge position, you will stand down immediately. That is a direct order. You are endangering this operation. Yara looked down at the road. She could see 6 Rangers bunched together behind a Humvee that was about to explode. The fuel tank was leaking, flames licking toward it, and they had no idea. If they stayed there 10 more seconds, they would die. She could also see the enemy position that had them pinned. A 2-man team with a Pecan machine gun, already traversing toward the fuel leak, ready to cut down anyone who tried to run. Yara had a choice. Obey the order and watch 6 men burn, or take the shot and end her career. She pressed her eye to the scope. The machine gunner's chest filled her vision. She had not come to Afghanistan to follow orders. She had come to save lives. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The machine gunner fell. His partner tried to grab the weapon, and Yara put him down too. Below, the 6 Rangers finally noticed the flames and ran. They made it to cover just as the Humvee erupted in a ball of fire and shrapnel. Harlan's voice exploded over the radio. I said stand down. Identify yourself immediately. That is a direct order. Yara chambered another round. 31 enemy positions remaining. She was just getting started. The 6 Rangers who had escaped the burning Humvee were still running when Yara spotted the next threat. A 3-man team with an RPG was repositioning on the northern ridge, trying to get an angle on the soldiers scrambling for new cover. If they reached their destination, they would have a clear shot at the largest cluster of Americans on the road. Yara shifted her rifle. 1,100 meters. A harder shot, but not impossible. The wind had picked up, swirling through the valley in unpredictable gusts. She watched the dust patterns on the far ridge, calculating, adjusting. The RPG team was moving fast, confident that no one could touch them at this distance. They were wrong. The first round took the man carrying the launcher. He crumpled mid-stride, the RPG tumbling from his hands. His partners froze for half a second, that fatal hesitation that separated veterans from amateurs, and Yara made them pay for it. 2 more shots. 2 more bodies. The northern ridge went quiet. Down on the road, Specialist Kimura had made it to a rock formation with 3 other Rangers. He was bleeding from a gash on his forehead, but he was alive and fighting. Yara watched him lay down, covering fire for a wounded soldier being dragged to safety, and she felt something loosen in her chest. The kid she had talked to behind the motor pool was going to make it. She would make sure of it. But staying in one position was suicide. The enemy knew where she was now, at least approximately, and they were converging. Yara could see movement on 3 different ridgelines, fighters working their way toward her through the rocks. They were being smart about it, using cover, never exposing themselves for more than a second or 2. These were not untrained farmers with rifles. These were experienced fighters who had been killing Americans in this valley for years. Yara grabbed her rifle and moved. The next position was 200 meters east, a shallow depression behind a boulder that offered decent sight lines and multiple escape routes. She covered the distance in a low crouch, rocks tearing at her knees, bullets occasionally snapping overhead as the enemy tried to pin down her location. By the time she settled into the new position, she was breathing hard, but her hands were steady. Sergeant First Class Royce had figured it out. She heard his voice come over the radio, cutting through the chaos with the calm authority of a man who had seen too many firefights to panic. Captain, I have eyes on the sniper position. Eastern Ridge, just below the tree line. Harlan's response was immediate. Get a team up there and bring them in. I want whoever that is in restraints. Sir, with respect, that sniper just saved Kimura's squad. And the 6 men from 2nd Platoon. Whoever it is, they're the only reason we're not all dead right now. I gave an order, Sergeant. A long pause. Then Royce's voice again, quieter now. Understood, sir. But my men are pinned down, and I cannot spare anyone for a retrieval mission. We will have to wait until the situation stabilizes. Yara almost smiled. Royce was not stupid. He knew exactly what he was doing. Every minute he delayed was another minute she could keep shooting, keep thinning the enemy positions, keep giving the Rangers a chance to survive. She found her next target. A command position on the western ridge, 3 men huddled around a radio. One of them was pointing, directing the fighters below, coordinating the ambush with hand signals and shouted commands. Take him out, and the enemy would lose their organization. 900 meters. Yara settled her breathing. The wind had shifted again, coming from the southwest now. She made the adjustment, found her hold, and fired. The commander jerked and fell. The 2 men beside him panicked, grabbing the radio and trying to drag their leader to cover. Yara let them go. Dead commanders created chaos. Wounded commanders created more chaos as their men tried to save them. 27 enemy positions remaining. But then she heard it, a sound that made her blood run cold. The distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle, much closer than it should have been. A round slammed into the boulder inches from her head, spraying her face with stone fragments. She rolled away instantly, scrambling for cover as another round punched through the space she had just occupied. Someone on the enemy side had a real rifle, a real scope, and real training. This was not suppressive fire. This was a sniper duel. Yara pressed herself into a crack between 2 rocks, making herself as small as possible while she assessed the threat. The shots had come from a northwest, somewhere on the ridge that overlooked her position. The enemy sniper had the high ground. He had her pinned, and if she moved, he would kill her. For the first time since the ambush began, Yara felt real fear. Not the manageable fear of combat, but the deep terror of being hunted by someone who might be better than her. Below, the Rangers were still dying. She could hear the gunfire, the screams, the desperate radio calls for support that was still 15 minutes away. Every second she spent hiding was a second the enemy used to slaughter her countrymen. Yara closed her eyes. She thought about her father, killed in an ambush 30 years ago in a country most Americans could not find on a map. She thought about her mother, who had raised her alone and never once told her she could not do something because she was a woman. She thought about Kimura, shaking behind the motor pool, trusting her when she said it would be okay. She opened her eyes. The enemy sniper was good, but Yara had spent 3 years teaching snipers at Fort Benning. She had trained men who went on to win competitions, to set records, to become legends. She knew every trick, every technique, every way to beat a shooter who thought he had you dead to rights. Time to find out if she was as good as she thought she was. Yara controlled her breathing and listened. The enemy sniper would be repositioning now, try to get a better angle on her hiding spot. That was what she would do. That was what any trained marksman would do. The question was whether he would move left toward the higher ground or right toward the better cover. She replayed the sound of his shots in her mind. The rifle was probably a Dragunov, maybe something better if he was one of the foreign fighters who had been flooding into the valley. The angle of impact suggested he was elevated, at least 50 meters above her current position. And he was patient. He had waited until she was stationary, until she was focused on her target before taking his shot. This man knew what he was doing. Yara pulled a small mirror from her kit, a piece of equipment most soldiers considered useless weight. She angled it carefully around the rock, scanning the northwest ridge in fragmented glimpses. Nothing. The enemy sniper was invisible, hidden in the same rocks and shadows that she would have used. But he was not alone. There, a flicker of movement, 200 meters to the left of where the shots had originated. A spotter, probably, repositioning to triangulate her location. Sniper teams worked in pairs for a reason. One to shoot, one to watch. If she could take out the spotter, the shooter would be half blind. Yara calculated the angles. If she moved fast enough, she could get a shot at the spotter before the primary sniper could react. But fast meant exposed. Fast meant trusting that her speed would beat his trigger finger. She thought about Fort Benning. 2 years ago, during a live fire exercise, her spotter had moved when she called clear. A secondary explosion had sent shrapnel through his shoulder, ending his career. The official report said it was an accident, a miscommunication, one of those things that happened in training. But Yara knew the truth. She had called clear when she should have waited. She had been impatient, eager to prove herself, and a good man had paid the price. She had never told anyone what really happened. When the review board asked, her spotter had covered for her, insisted he moved on his own initiative. He had a pregnant wife, a baby on the way, and a medical discharge was better than a dishonorable one. So Yara had let him take the blame for her mistake, and she had carried that weight ever since. Not today. Today she would not be impatient. Today she would be perfect. Yara burst from cover and sprinted east, zigzagging across open ground. A rifle cracked behind her, and rock exploded near her feet. Another shot closer this time, but she was already diving behind a new boulder. She rolled, came up with her rifle, and found the spotter in her scope. He was young, maybe 20, with a radio pressed to his ear. He was telling the sniper where she had gone. He was painting a target on her back. Yara fired. The spotter dropped. She was moving again before his body hit the ground, scrambling higher up the ridge toward a position she had spotted during her initial climb. The enemy sniper would be adjusting now, trying to track her movement, but without his spotter, he was working blind. She had maybe 30 seconds before he figured out where she was going. 20 seconds later, she was in position. The new vantage point gave her a clear view of a northwest ridge, and now she had the elevation advantage. Somewhere in those rocks was a man who wanted to kill her. She just had to find him first. Below, the battle continued. Yara could hear Royce rallying the Rangers, organizing a counterattack against the nearest enemy positions. He was a good NCO, the kind who led from the front and never asked his men to do something he would not do himself. With her providing overwatch and him directing the ground fight, they might actually survive this. She scanned the ridge through her scope, looking for the telltale signs of a hidden shooter. Disturbed rocks, unnatural shadows, the faint glint of glass or metal. The enemy sniper was good at concealment, but nobody was perfect. Everyone made mistakes. There, a slight discoloration in the rocks, about 800 meters out. It could be nothing. A natural formation, a trick of the light. But Yara had learned to trust her instincts, and her instinct said that discoloration was a ghillie suit. She aimed. The crosshairs settled on the center of the discolored patch. If she was wrong, she would waste a round and reveal her position. If she was right, she would eliminate the most dangerous threat on this battlefield. Yara thought about her spotter, the man whose career she had ended. She thought about the guilt she had carried for 2 years, the weight that pressed down on her every time she looked through a scope. She had made a mistake once. She had been impatient, sloppy, and someone else had suffered for it. Not today. She fired. The discolored patch moved. A body slumped forward from behind the rocks, a rifle tumbling from dead hands. The enemy sniper had been exactly where she thought he was. Yara allowed herself one breath of relief. Then she was moving again, shifting to a new position, scanning for the next threat. 25 enemy positions remaining. The Rangers below were still in danger, and she had just announced her location to every fighter in the valley. But something had changed. The fear that had gripped her when the sniper duel began was gone now, replaced by something colder and more focused. She had faced the best the enemy had to offer, and she had won. Whatever came next, she could handle it. Royce's voice crackled over the radio. Sniper down on the northwest ridge. Whoever our guardian angel is, they just took out their best shooter. Yara chambered another round. She was not anyone's angel. She was just a soldier doing her job, and her job was not finished yet. The enemy responded to their sniper's death with fury. Every position on the ridgelines opened fire at once. A wall of lead and noise designed to suppress, to terrify, to pin down whoever had been dismantling their ambush. Yara pressed herself flat against the rocks as bullets screamed overhead, chipping stone, filling the air with dust and the sharp smell of cordite. She had expected retaliation. She had not expected this. For 3 full minutes, she could do nothing but survive. The volume of fire was too intense, too concentrated. Every time she tried to raise her head, another burst would send her diving back to cover. The enemy had finally taken her seriously, and they were throwing everything they had at the eastern ridge. Below, the Rangers used the distraction to reposition. Yara could hear Royce barking orders, moving his men to better cover while the enemy focused their attention elsewhere. It was working. The ambush was fracturing, the coordinated attack dissolving into chaos as the fighters tried to deal with a threat they could not see clearly. But it came at a cost. Yara was pinned, useless, unable to provide the overwatch that had been keeping the Rangers alive. And the enemy was getting closer. She could hear movement in the rocks below her, the scrape of boots and the clatter of equipment. They were sending teams to flush her out. She had to move. Staying meant death. But moving meant exposing herself to a dozen guns that were waiting for exactly that. The RPG came out of nowhere. Yara saw the smoke trail a fraction of a second before impact. She threw herself sideways, but the explosion still caught her, a hammer blow of pressure and heat that sent her tumbling across the rocks. Her rifle flew from her hands. Her ears filled with a high-pitched ringing that drowned out everything else. For a long moment, she lay face down in the dirt, unable to think, unable to move, unable to do anything but exist in a world of pain and confusion. Get up. The voice in her head was her mother's. The same voice that had pushed her through basic training, through sniper school, through every obstacle the army had thrown at her. Get up, Yara. You're not done yet. She forced her eyes open. Blood was running down her face from a gash somewhere above her hairline. Her left arm was not responding properly, probably dislocated. And her rifle, her SR-25 that she had carried through 3 deployments, was lying 10 feet away with the scope shattered and the stock cracked. Yara crawled toward it anyway. The weapon was destroyed, useless, but she could not leave it behind. It was hers. She reached it just as another burst of gunfire tore up the ground beside her, and she rolled into a shallow crevice with a broken rifle clutched to her chest. Think. She had to think. The enemy teams were still coming. She could hear them, closer now, maybe 50 meters below. Her sidearm was still holstered, but a pistol against rifles at range was suicide. She needed a weapon. She needed a way out. She needed something. 20 meters to her left, a body lay sprawled across the rocks. American uniform. Ranger tab on the shoulder. He must have been hit during the initial ambush, before she ever reached this ridge. In his hands, still gripped in death, was an M110 sniper rifle. Yara looked at the dead Ranger for a long moment. He was young, probably younger than Kimura. Someone's son, someone's brother. He had come to this valley to do his duty, and now he was gone. Just another name that would be read at a memorial service nobody would remember. "I am sorry," she whispered. Then she crawled toward him. The M110 was intact, or close enough. The scope had been knocked loose from its mount, probably when he fell, but the rifle itself was functional. Yara checked the magazine. 14 rounds remaining. She looked through the damaged scope and saw a blurred, distorted image. Anything beyond 600 meters would be guesswork. It would have to do. She shouldered the rifle and began climbing again, away from the enemy teams, toward a secondary position she had identified earlier. Her arm screamed with every movement. Blood kept dripping into her eyes. The ringing in her ears was fading, but the world still felt muffled and distant. 16 enemy positions remaining. 16 clusters of fighters who thought they had finally killed the shooter who had been hunting them. 16 targets that stood between the Rangers and survival. Yara reached her new position and settled into a stable shooting stance. The scope was almost useless, the reticle swimming in and out of focus, but she had been shooting since she was 12 years old. She had made harder shots than this. She had made impossible shots when impossible was the only option. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. Fear is just your mind asking if you're ready. Answer it. Yara found her first target, a machine gun team, 600 meters out, laying down fire on Royce's position. At this distance, with this scope, she had maybe a 60% chance of hitting. Maybe less. She thought about the dead ranger whose rifle she was holding. She thought about Kimura, still fighting somewhere below. She thought about every man on that road who was counting on her without even knowing she existed. 60% was enough. She fired. The machine gunner dropped. His partner tried to swing the weapon around, and Yara fired again. He dropped too. 14 positions remaining. 14 targets. And a damaged rifle with 12 rounds left. The math was impossible. But Yara had spent her entire life making impossible math work. Royce's voice cut through the static on Yara's headset. All units be advised. Signals intelligence has intercepted enemy communications. The ambush was planned using leaked patrol routes. Someone gave them our position before we ever left the wire. The words hit Yara like a second explosion. A leak. Someone had betrayed them. Someone with access to mission planning had sold out 37 Rangers to die in this valley, and whoever it was had almost succeeded. She processed the information while scanning for her next target. The leak changed everything and nothing. It meant there was a traitor somewhere in the chain of command, someone who would need to be found and punished. But right now, in this moment, it did not matter. What mattered was the 14 enemy positions still firing on American soldiers. What mattered was staying alive long enough to make a difference. Yara found a two-man team repositioning on the southern ridge. 550 meters. Even with the damaged scope, she could make this shot. She fired twice, and both men fell. 12 positions remaining. Below, the Rangers were finally gaining ground. Royce had organized a counterattack, pushing toward the enemy positions closest to the road. She could see Kimura moving with his squad, laying down, covering fire while others advanced. The kid was doing everything she had told him. Stay low. Move fast. Trust your training. But the enemy was not finished. A heavy machine gun opened up from a fortified position on the western ridge, pinning down the advancing Rangers. The gun was dug in deep, protected by sandbags and natural rock formations. From her angle, Yara could not get a clear shot on the crew. She could see the muzzle flash, could trace the line of fire cutting through her countrymen, but the shooters themselves were invisible. She needed a different angle. She needed to move again. Her arm had gone from screaming to numb, which was probably worse. The blood on her face had dried into a sticky mass that pulled at her skin every time she changed expression. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain through her body, but pain was just information. Pain told her she was still alive. Yara crawled 50 meters to the east, following a shallow drainage channel that offered minimal cover. Bullets snapped overhead as she moved, but they were not aimed fire. The enemy had lost track of her again, shooting at shadows and possibilities rather than a confirmed target. The new position gave her a partial view of the machine gun nest. She could see one of the crew members, just a shoulder and the side of his head, feeding ammunition into the weapon. It was not much of a target, maybe a 6-inch window of exposed flesh at 700 meters through a scope that could barely hold zero. Yara took the shot anyway. The round struck the ammunition bearer in the neck. He collapsed sideways, disrupting the feed, and the machine gun went silent for 3 precious seconds. The Rangers used those seconds to advance another 20 meters, closing on the enemy position. But the gun crew recovered quickly. Another fighter grabbed the ammunition belt, and the weapon roared back to life, sweeping the road with renewed fury. 2 Rangers went down, and Yara heard their screams over the radio. She had to end this. Now, Yara studied the fortified position, looking for weakness. The sandbags were too thick to penetrate. The rock formation provided overhead cover. The crew was disciplined, keeping their heads down between bursts. A direct shot was impossible. But the position had one flaw, a narrow gap between the sandbags and the rock, maybe 8 inches wide, that allowed the crew to observe their field of fire. If she could put a round through that gap at exactly the right angle, it would ricochet off the interior rock face and into the crew compartment. The shot was insane. A bank shot at 700 meters with a damage scope. The kind of shot that instructors at Fort Benning would call impossible and then demonstrate just to show it could be done. Yara had made that shot exactly once in training, and it had taken her 4 attempts. She did not have 4 rounds to spare. One shot, one chance. Yara adjusted her aim, calculating the angle of incidence, the probable trajectory after impact, the position where the crew would be crouching. She was not aiming at a person. She was aiming at a point in space where physics would do the killing for her. She fired. The round entered the gap and vanished. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the machine gun fell silent. Then a body slumped forward through the observation gap, sliding down the sandbags to the rocks below. 10 positions remaining. Royce's voice came over the radio, something between disbelief and awe. Machine gun nest is neutralized. Whoever you are up there, I owe you a beer. Yara allowed herself a small smile. She would collect on that beer. But first, she had 10 more problems to solve. The enemy commander's voice crackled over the intercepted frequency, and Yara heard the translation through her headset. Concentrate all remaining forces on the eastern ridge. One shooter is destroying us. Find her, kill her, and then we finish the Americans. Every surviving fighter in the valley was now hunting her specifically. They had finally realized that one person was dismantling their ambush, and they were willing to sacrifice everything to stop her. Yara chambered another round. Good. That meant they were not shooting at the Rangers anymore. That meant she had become the priority target, the focus of their fear and fury. Let them come. She had been underestimated her entire life. She had been dismissed, doubted, and discarded by men who thought they knew her limits better than she did. Captain Harlan was just the latest in a long line of people who looked at her and saw weakness instead of strength. 10 enemy positions, 9 rounds, and an entire army coming to kill her. Yara settled into her shooting position and waited for the enemy to make their move. She had never felt more alive. They came from 3 directions at once. Yara spotted the first team moving through the rocks below her, for fighters advancing in a tactical spread that suggested real training. A second team was flanking from the north, trying to cut off her escape route. The third was working along the ridgeline itself, using the terrain she had been using, learning from her tactics. She had maybe 5 minutes before they closed the trap. Yara engaged the nearest team first. 2 shots, 2 kills. The survivors dove for cover, but she had already shifted to the northern flanking team. 1 shot, 1 kill. The 4th round went wide as her target dropped behind a boulder at the last second. 6 rounds remaining. 8 enemy positions. She moved again, sliding down a rocky slope that tore at her uniform and reopened the gash on her forehead. Fresh blood blinded her left eye, but she did not have time to wipe it away. The enemy was too close, too coordinated. They had finally figured out how to hunt her. The ridgeline team was the biggest threat. 3 fighters with a clear line of sight to her most likely escape routes. If she did not deal with them first, they would cut her down the moment she broke cover. Yara found a narrow crevice between 2 boulders and wedged herself inside. The position was terrible for shooting, but excellent for hiding. She needed a moment to think, to breathe, to figure out her next move. That was when she heard the whimpering. 10 meters to her right, tucked into a shallow depression, a ranger was lying in a pool of his own blood. He was young, maybe 23, with a gut wound that had turned his uniform into a sodden mess of red and brown. His rifle was gone, probably lost when he fell, and his hands were pressed against his stomach in a futile attempt to hold himself together. Yara should have kept moving. Every second she spent stationary was a second the enemy used to close in. The tactical choice, the smart choice, was to leave the wounded man and focus on eliminating the remaining threats. She crawled toward him anyway. The ranger's eyes went wide when he saw her. He tried to speak, but only a wet gurgle came out. Yara pressed her hand over his, adding pressure to the wound, and leaned close to his ear. "You're going to be okay," she whispered. "Medevac is coming. You just have to hold on." It was probably a lie. Gut wounds were bad, and this one looked worse than most. But the lie was what he needed, so the lie was what she gave him. The ranger's hand found hers and squeezed. His lips moved, forming words she could barely hear. "Thank you." Yara squeezed back. "What is your name?" "Riley. Private First Class Marcus Riley." "Listen to me, Riley. I have to go, but I'm going to kill every single one of them, and then I'm going to make sure you get home. Do you understand?" Riley nodded weakly. His grip loosened, but his eyes stayed focused on her face. Yara pulled away and checked her rifle. 6 rounds, 8 positions, and now a promise she intended to keep. She thought about her father, Colonel Adewale Okonkwo, Nigerian Army, killed in an ambush in the Niger Delta when she was 7 years old. Her mother had told her the story 1,000 times, how he had been leading a patrol through hostile territory, how the enemy had known they were coming, how her father had died trying to save his men, fighting to the last, even when the situation was hopeless. For 22 years, Yara had carried that story like a weight around her neck. She had joined the army because of it. She had become a sniper because of it. She had requested this deployment, this unit, this valley, because she needed to prove something that she had never been able to put into words. Now, finally she understood. She was not here to avenge her father. She was not here to prove that women belonged in combat. She was not even here to prove herself to Captain Harlan or anyone else. She was here because some people were born to stand between the innocent and the darkness. Some people were built to be the shield that others needed. Her father had been one of those people, and so was she. Yara rose from her hiding spot and moved toward the ridgeline team. 3 fighters, well-armed, well-trained, completely unaware that death was coming for them. The first one died before he knew she was there. A single shot from 50 meters placed perfectly through the gap between his helmet and his body armor. The second spun toward the sound and took a round through the chest. The third tried to run and made it exactly 4 steps before Yara put him down. 3 rounds remaining. 5 enemy positions. Royce's voice crackled in her ear. "Okonkwo, I know that is you up there. I am moving a team to support your position. Hold on." "Negative," Yara responded, keying her radio for the first time since the ambush began. "Stay with the wounded. I have this." A pause. Then Royce again, his voice carrying something that sounded almost like respect. "Understood. Give them hell, Staff Sergeant." Yara moved toward the remaining enemy positions. Private Riley was counting on her. The Rangers below were counting on her. And somewhere, in whatever place the dead went to watch over the living, her father was counting on her too. She would not let any of them down. 3 rounds. 5 positions. The math still did not work. Yara crouched behind a shattered tree stump and assessed her options. The remaining enemy fighters had consolidated into defensive positions, abandoning their hunt for her in favor of survival. They knew they were losing. They knew that whoever was on this ridge had killed more than 30 of their comrades in less than an hour. Now they were digging in, waiting for reinforcements or darkness or some miracle that would let them escape. She could not let that happen. If even one of them got away, they would report what had happened here. They would tell others about the American sniper who had broken their ambush. And the next time they planned an attack, they would account for her. More importantly, the Rangers below were still in danger. The 5 remaining positions had overlapping fields of fire that covered the only extraction route. Until those positions were eliminated, medevac could not land and the wounded could not be evacuated. Private Riley was running out of time. Yara studied the enemy positions through her damaged scope. 2 fighters in a shallow trench, 300 meters out. 2 more behind a rock formation for 150 meters. And the last one, probably their commander, in an elevated position with a radio antenna visible above the rocks. 600 meters, partially concealed, the hardest shot of the 5. 3 rounds, 5 targets. She would have to make some of them count twice. The memory came unbidden, rising from a place she had tried to bury for 2 years. Fort Benning, the advanced marksmanship course, the day everything had changed. His name was Sergeant David Pellegrino, her spotter, her partner, the man who watched her back while she watched the world through a scope. They had worked together for 8 months, developed the kind of trust that only came from shared danger and absolute reliance. She would have taken a bullet for him. She thought he would have done the same. The exercise was supposed to be routine. Clear a series of targets in a simulated urban environment. Demonstrate proficiency in rapid target acquisition. Yara had done it 100 times before. But that day, something was different. She was distracted, thinking about her upcoming deployment, eager to prove she was ready for combat. When she called clear on the second position, she had not actually confirmed that the secondary charge had been disarmed. She had assumed. She had been impatient. The explosion caught Pellegrino in the shoulder and back. Shrapnel tore through his body armor, shredded his rotator cuff, ended his career in a single terrible instant. He had screamed, and Yara had frozen, unable to process what her impatience had cost him. The review board had been thorough. They had examined every second of footage, every communication, every decision point. And when they asked Pellegrino what happened, he had lied. A move before she called clear, he had said, "My mistake. She did everything right." Yara had sat in that hearing room and let him take the blame. She had let a good man sacrifice his reputation to protect hers, because she was too afraid of what the truth would cost her. Too afraid of being seen as the woman who could not handle combat, who made mistakes under pressure, who got her partner hurt. For 2 years, that lie had eaten at her. Every shot she took, every mission she completed, was shadowed by the knowledge that she did not deserve any of it. She had built her career on another man's sacrifice, and she had never found the courage to make it right. But here, now, in this valley full of death and desperation, something shifted. Pellegrino had not lied to protect her career. He had lied because he believed in her. He had seen something in Yara that she had never been able to see in herself, and he had decided that her future mattered more than his pride. He had given her a gift, not a burden. She could spend the rest of her life feeling guilty about it, or she could honor it by becoming the soldier he believed she could be. Yara raised her rifle and sighted on the 2 fighters in the trench. They were close together, talking, probably discussing their options. If she timed it right, if she placed the shot perfectly, she could take them both with a single round. It was the kind of shot that should not be possible. A through and through at 300 meters, hitting 2 targets in sequence. The bullet would have to pass through the first man's chest cavity without fragmenting, maintain enough velocity to penetrate the second, and strike a vital area on both. Yara exhaled. She thought about Pellegrino, about his faith in her. She thought about Riley, bleeding out below. She thought about her father, who had died protecting his men. She fired. The first fighter dropped. The second staggered, clutched his throat, and collapsed on top of his partner. 2 rounds remaining. 3 positions. The math finally worked. Yara shifted to the rock formation. 450 meters. 2 targets. 1 round to spare if she was perfect. She was perfect. 1 round. 1 position. The commander with the radio, 600 meters out, hidden behind rocks that exposed only a sliver of his head. Yara steadied her breathing. The scope was barely functional. Her arm had gone completely numb. Blood was crusting in her left eye. None of it mattered. This was the shot she had been training for her entire life. She fired. The commander fell. The valley went quiet. For the first time in over an hour, no guns were firing. No explosions were shaking the rocks. The ambush was over. Yara slumped against the tree stump, her rifle falling from nerveless fingers. She had nothing left. No ammunition, no strength, no reserves of will or determination. She had given everything she had to give. Royce's voice came over the radio, thick with emotion. All enemy positions neutralized. I repeat, all enemy positions neutralized. Medevac is cleared to land. Yara closed her eyes. Private Riley was going to make a home. They all were. Because of her. The first Black Hawk touched down in a storm of dust and rotor wash. Medics poured out before the skids fully settled, sprinting toward the wounded with stretchers and trauma kits. Yara watched from her position on a ridge as they loaded Private Riley into the helicopter, his hand raised weakly in a gesture that might have been a wave. He was alive. She had kept her promise. The climb down from the ridge took longer than it should have. Yara's body had finally registered the full extent of its damage, and every step sent fresh signals of pain screaming through her nervous system. Her dislocated arm hung uselessly at her side. The gash on her forehead had opened again, painting half her face in fresh blood. Her legs trembled with exhaustion, threatening to buckle with each movement. But she made it. Step by step, rock by rock, she descended from the killing ground she had held for over an hour. Royce met her at the base of the ridge. The senior NCO looked like he had aged 10 years since morning, his face gray with dust and stress, but his eyes were bright with something Yara had not expected. Respect. Genuine, unqualified respect. Staff Sergeant Okonkwo, he said, I have been in this valley for 4 months. I have seen a lot of soldiers do a lot of brave things, but I have never seen anything like what you did today. Yara tried to respond, but her voice came out as a croak. Royce handed her a canteen, and she drank greedily, the water washing away some of the dust and copper taste of blood. How many? She finally managed. Royce shook his head slowly. We are still counting, but the initial assessment is 37 confirmed kills. 37 enemy fighters, Staff Sergeant. You personally neutralized every hostile position that had us pinned. The number did not feel real. 37 lives ended by her hands in less than 90 minutes. 37 men who had woken up this morning expecting to kill Americans and were now lying dead in the rocks above her. Yara had trained for this, prepared for this, but the reality was something else entirely. She pushed the thought away. There would be time to process later. Right now, she needed to focus on the living. The wounded, she said. How many did we lose? Royce's expression tightened. 3 Kia before you engaged. After that, 0. Every man who is still breathing when you started shooting is still breathing now. 3 dead. 3 Rangers who had died in the opening moments of the ambush, before she could reach her position, before she could make a difference. 3 families who would receive folded flags and hollow condolences. 3 names she would carry for the rest of her life. But it should have been worse. It should have been so much worse. An ambush like this, with this many fighters, this much coordination, should have wiped out half the company. Instead, 34 Rangers were going home because one shooter had refused to follow orders. Speaking of which, Royce said, his voice dropping, the captain wants to see you. Yara looked toward the road, where Captain Harlan was sitting against a Humvee tire while a medic wrapped his wounded leg. Even from this distance, she could see the conflict on his face. Anger and pride and confusion, all warring for dominance. Is he going to have me arrested? She asked. Royce almost smiled. He wanted to, right up until I told him the final count. Hard to court-martial someone for saving 34 lives. They walked together toward the convoy. Rangers stopped what they were doing as Yara passed, their eyes following her with expressions she could not quite read. Some nodded. Others simply stared. One young specialist, barely old enough to shave, whispered something to his buddy that sounded like that as her. Kimura was waiting by the captain's Humvee. The young specialist had a bandage wrapped around his head and another around his forearm, but he was standing on his own 2 feet with a rifle in his hands. When he saw Yara, his face split into a grin that seemed too large for the circumstances. Staff Sergeant, he said, you saved my life. Twice. Just doing my job. Specialist. Kimura shook his head. No, you did more than that. Everyone knows it. He stepped aside, and Yara found herself face to face with Captain Harlan. The officer looked worse than she felt. His leg wound was serious, probably a through and through from shrapnel, and his face was pale from blood loss. But his eyes were clear, and they fixed on Yara with an intensity that made her want to step back. Staff Sergeant Okonkwo, he said. His voice was flat, controlled, giving nothing away. Sir, I gave you a direct order to stay with the vehicles. Yes, sir. You did, and you disobeyed that order. Yara met his gaze without flinching. Yes, sir. I did. A long moment passed. Around them, the sounds of the evacuation continued. Helicopters landing and lifting off. Wounded being loaded onto stretchers. The organized chaos of survival after disaster. Then Harlan did something Yara had not expected. He extended his hand. I was wrong about you, he said. The words seemed to cost him something, each syllable dragged out reluctantly. I was wrong about what you could do, and if you had followed my orders, most of my men would be dead right now. Yara looked at his hand for a moment. Then she took it. I did not do it to prove you wrong, sir. I did it because it needed to be done. Harlan nodded slowly. I know. That is what makes it worse. He released her hand and leaned back against the Humvee. Battalion is sending the colonel. He wants a full debrief on what happened here. I suggest you get that arm looked at before he arrives. Yes, sir. And Okonkwo. Harlan's voice stopped her as she turned to leave. For what it is worth, I am recommending you for Valor Commendation. You earned it. Yara did not know what to say to that. So she simply nodded and walked toward the medic station, leaving Captain Harlan to reckon with his own assumptions. The medic reset Yara's shoulder without warning. One moment she was sitting on an ammunition crate. The next a white-hot bolt of agony shot through her entire body as the joint popped back into place. She bit down on a scream, tasting blood where her teeth cut into her lip. Sorry, the medic said, not sounding sorry at all. Easier when you do not see it coming. Yara flexed her fingers experimentally. The arm was functional again, though it would be weeks before she had full range of motion. The medic cleaned the gash on her forehead, applied butterfly bandages, and pronounced her fit for duty with the casual indifference of someone who had seen much worse. The colonel's helicopter arrived 20 minutes later. Colonel Aaron Richardson was a tall man with silver hair and the kind of bearing that made junior officers stand straighter without being told. He had commanded battalions in 3 different combat zones and had a reputation for 2 things: absolute fairness and zero tolerance for incompetence. The fact that he had flown out personally said everything about how seriously Battalion was taking what had happened in this valley. Yara watched him step off the helicopter and scan the chaos of the extraction site. His eyes moved methodically, taking in the destroyed vehicles, the wounded being loaded onto birds, the body bags lined up near the road. When his gaze finally landed on Yara, he held it for a long moment before walking toward Captain Harlan. The debrief took place in the shadow of a Humvee that had somehow survived the ambush intact. Harlan went first, walking the colonel through the mission plan, the ambush, the company's response. He did not mention Yara's role until Richardson asked directly. I understand we had a sniper attached to this operation, the colonel said. Where was she positioned during the engagement? Harlan hesitated. A muscle in his jaw twitched. She was assigned to vehicle security, sir. Vehicle security. Richardson's voice was carefully neutral. And yet my preliminary reports indicate that a single shooter neutralized 37 enemy positions from the eastern ridge. Would you care to explain that discrepancy, Captain? The silence stretched. Yara could see Harlan wrestling with himself, pride and honesty fighting for control. Finally, he spoke. Staff Sergeant Okonkwo disobeyed my direct order, sir. I told her to stay with the vehicles. She ignored that order and took a position on the ridge without authorization. He paused, and something shifted in his expression. And if she had not done that, I would be writing condolence letters to 34 families instead of 3. Richardson absorbed this without visible reaction. Then he turned to Yara. Staff Sergeant, walk me through it. So she did. Every shot, every position change, every decision point. She told him about the sniper duel, the RPG that destroyed her rifle, the wounded ranger whose weapon she had taken. She told him about the damaged scope and the impossible shots, and the moment when she had realized the math did not work, but did the math anyway. When she finished, Richardson was quiet for a long time. Behind him, the last of the wounded were being loaded onto helicopters. The valley was emptying, the rangers pulling out of the kill zone that should have been their grave. Staff Sergeant, Richardson finally said, do you understand that disobeying a direct order in combat is a court-martial offense? Yes, sir. Do you understand that what you did could have ended your career? Yes, sir. Richardson nodded slowly. It could have, but it will not. He turned to Harlan. Captain, I want your full written report on my desk by tomorrow morning. Include everything. Do not leave out your initial assessment of Staff Sergeant Okonkwo or your decision to assign her to vehicle security. I want the complete picture. Harlan stiffened. Sir, I take full responsibility for my decisions. I know you do. That is why you are still in command of this company. Richardson looked back at Yara. Staff Sergeant, your actions today will be reviewed for commendation at the highest levels. I have already spoken with Division. What you did here, the number of lives you saved, it is going to be studied. It is going to be taught. You changed the way a lot of people think about what one soldier can accomplish. I was just doing my job, sir. No. Richardson shook his head. You were doing your duty. There's a difference. Your job was vehicle security. Your duty was to protect your fellow soldiers. Today you chose duty over job, and 34 men are going home because of it. He extended his hand, and Yara shook it. The colonel's grip was firm, his eyes steady. One more thing, Richardson said. The intelligence leak. We have identified the source. A contractor working logistics at FOB Restrepo. He was selling patrol routes to the enemy for 6 months. We picked him up an hour ago. Yara felt something cold settle in her stomach. 6 months. How many patrols have been compromised? How many soldiers had died because one man decided American lives were worth less than money? He will face military tribunal, Richardson continued, and he will spend the rest of his life in Leavenworth. But I can promise you, it was not enough. Nothing would be enough to balance the scales for the men who had died because of that betrayal. But it was something. It was justice, or at least the closest thing to justice that existed in a world where men sold their countrymen for cash. Richardson turned to leave, then paused. Staff Sergeant, when you are recovered, I want you to consider a position at the sniper school. We need instructors who understand what it means to make the impossible possible. Think about it. He walked back to his helicopter without waiting for a response. Yara watched him go, trying to process everything that had just happened. Commendation. Teaching position. Her actions studied and taught to future snipers. 24 hours ago, she had been an unwanted attachment, dismissed and disrespected by a commander who thought she did not belong. Now she was standing in the ashes of an ambush she had single-handedly broken, being offered a chance to shape the next generation of shooters. Royce appeared at her elbow. The colonel does not hand out compliments, he said quietly. I have served under him for 3 years. That might be the most I have ever heard him say to his staff sergeant. Yara did not know how to respond, so she just stood there, watching the helicopter lift off, carrying Colonel Richardson back to a world where paperwork and politics mattered more than bullets and blood. Behind her, the valley was finally quiet. The enemy was dead. The Rangers were safe. And somewhere in that silence, Yara could almost hear her father's voice, telling her that he was proud. The sun was setting over FOB Restrepo when the last helicopter lifted off from the valley. Yara stood at the edge of the landing zone, watching the bird shrink against the orange sky until it disappeared behind the mountains. The wounded were gone. The dead were gone. All that remained were the soldiers who had survived and the memories they would carry forever. Royce found her there an hour later, still staring at the horizon. You should eat something, he said. Chow Hall is open. It is not good, but it is food. Yara shook her head. Not hungry. Royce stood beside her in silence for a while. The FOB was quieter than usual, the normal bustle of military life muted by the weight of what had happened. Soldiers moved in small groups, talking in low voices, processing the day in their own ways. I owe you an apology, Royce finally said. Yara turned to look at him. For what? When you arrived yesterday, I did not say anything. Harlan was wrong about you, and I knew it, but I did not speak up. I let him sideline you because it was easier than fighting him. Royce's jaw tightened. If you had listened to him, if you had stayed with the vehicles like he ordered, I would be dead. My whole squad would be dead. And it would have been partly my fault for not having your back. You did not know what I could do. No, but I should have given you the chance to show me. That is what leaders do. They give people chances. Royce extended his hand. I will not make that mistake again. Yara shook his hand. The grip was firm, honest, the handshake of a man who meant what he said. For what it is worth, she said, you kept those men alive down there. You organized the counterattack, got the wounded to cover, held the line when everything was falling apart. That is leadership too. Royce almost smiled. Maybe, but I had help. He glanced toward the ridge that had been Yara's killing ground. 37 confirmed. I still cannot wrap my head around it. Neither could Yara. if she was being honest. The number felt abstract, disconnected from reality. 37 trigger pulls. 37 bodies. 37 lives ended because they had chosen to kill Americans and she had chosen to stop them. She did not feel like a hero. She felt tired, hollowed out, like someone had scooped everything out of her and left only the shell behind. "Come on," Royce said. "There is someone who wants to see you." He led her through the FOB to a small tent near the aid station. Inside, Private First Class Amara Diallo was organizing medical supplies, her movements quick and efficient despite the exhaustion evident in her face. When she saw Yara, she stopped what she was doing and crossed the tent in 3 quick strides. "I heard what you did," Diallo said. Her accent, a blend of Senegalese, French, and Brooklyn attitude, made the words sound almost musical. The whole base heard. "You are all anyone is talking about." Yara shifted uncomfortably. "I was just doing my job." "Stop saying that." Diallo grabbed her hand and squeezed. "You saved them. All of them. The ones I worked on today, the ones who walked away without a scratch. They're all going home because of you. Do you understand that?" Yara did not know how to answer. She had spent so long being dismissed, doubted, underestimated, that she had no framework for this kind of recognition. It felt foreign, like wearing someone else's uniform. Diallo seemed to understand. She released Yara's hand and stepped back. "You should call your mother," she said. "She should hear your voice. She should know you are okay." The suggestion hit Yara harder than any bullet had. Her mother, Grace Okonkwo, who had raised her alone after her father's death, who had worked double shifts as a trauma nurse to pay for school, who had never once told her daughter that she could not do something, even when the rest of the world disagreed. Yara found a satellite phone 20 minutes later. The connection was scratchy, the delay frustrating, but when her mother's voice came through the static, none of that mattered. "Baby girl." Grace's voice was thick with sleep and sudden alertness. It was the middle of the night in Detroit. "What is wrong? Are you hurt?" "Yamothea, Mama. I am fine. I just needed to hear your voice." A pause. Then, softer, "What happened?" So Yara told her. Not the tactical details, not the body count, but the truth underneath it all. She told her about being dismissed by Harlan, about climbing to the ridge anyway, about the choice she had made to disobey orders and the lives that choice had saved. She told her about the fear and the focus and the moment when she had finally understood why she had become a soldier. When she finished, there was silence on the line. Then her mother spoke, and her voice was steady despite the tears Yara could hear beneath the words. "Your father would be so proud of you," Grace said. "I'm so proud of you. You did exactly what I raised you to do. You stood up when it mattered. You protected people who needed protecting." "I keep thinking about him," Yara admitted. "About what happened to him. I used to think I joined the army to avenge him. But that is not it. I joined because I wanted to be like him. I wanted to be the person who stands between others and the darkness. You are that person, baby girl. You always have been. Your father saw it when you were just a child. He used to say that you had a warrior's heart." She laughed softly. He was right. They talked for another 10 minutes about nothing and everything, the mundane details of home and life that anchored Yara to a world beyond combat and death. When she finally hung up, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Peace. Not happiness, not satisfaction, but a quiet peace that settled into her bones like warmth after a long, cold night. She walked back to her quarters, passing soldiers who nodded respectfully as she went by. Tomorrow there would be paperwork and debriefs and the long process of official recognition. Tomorrow she would have to decide about the colonel's offer, about sniper school, about what came next. But tonight, she was just a daughter who had made her mother proud. And that was enough. 1 week later, the official notification arrived. Yara was cleaning her new rifle, a replacement SR-25 that battalion had expedited to FOB Restrepo, when Royce appeared at the door of her quarters. He was holding a folder with the kind of careful reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. "It is official," he said. "Bronze Star with Valor. The paperwork went through this morning." Yara set down her cleaning kit. She had expected something, but seeing the confirmation in black and white made it real in a way that nothing else had. A Bronze Star, the 4th highest combat decoration in the United States Army. for a woman who had been assigned to vehicle security. There is more, Royce continued. Division wants to use the engagement as a training case study. They're calling it one of the most effective single-shooter actions in the history of the Afghan campaign. Every sniper school in the country is going to be teaching what you did in that valley. Yara did not know what to say. A week ago, she had been an unwanted attachment. Now, she was a case study, an example, a name that future soldiers would learn in classrooms far from any battlefield. The colonel's offer still stands, Royce said. Lead instructor position at Fort Benning. You would be training the next generation. Passing on what you know. He paused. Is a good offer, Yara. You have earned it. She thought about it. Fort Benning meant stability, safety, a chance to shape young soldiers into the kind of warriors the Army needed. It meant classrooms and ranges and the slow, steady work of building something that would outlast her. It was everything she should want, but also meant leaving this. The FOB, the Rangers, the daily reality of soldiers who needed what she could give them right now, not in some future training cycle. I will think about it, she said. Royce nodded. He understood. Some decisions cannot be rushed. The ceremony happened 3 days later. A small affair by military standards, just the surviving members of the company and a few officers from battalion. They gathered in the dusty square at the center of FOB Restrepo, the same square where Yara had arrived 10 days ago as an outsider. She was not an outsider anymore. Captain Harlan read the citation. His voice was steady, professional, but Yara could hear something else underneath. Respect, maybe, or the particular discomfort of a man acknowledging his own mistakes in public. For extraordinary heroism in combat against an armed enemy of the United States, Harlan read. Staff Sergeant Yara Okonkwo distinguished herself by gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of her life above and beyond the call of duty. Disregarding orders to remain with the vehicle convoy, Staff Sergeant Okonkwo independently maneuvered to an elevated position and engaged enemy forces threatening the lives of her fellow soldiers. Over the course of 90 minutes, while wounded and under direct enemy fire, she single-handedly neutralized 37 hostile combatants, breaking an ambush that would otherwise have resulted in catastrophic casualties. Her actions directly saved the lives of 34 American soldiers. The words hung in the air. 37, 34, numbers that would follow her for the rest of her life. Harlan pinned the medal to her chest. For a moment, their eyes met, and something passed between them. Not friendship, not yet, maybe not ever, but understanding. The recognition that they had both been changed by what happened in that valley. Staff Sergeant, Harlan said quietly, so only she could hear. I requested that you be permanently assigned to this company. If you want it, the position is yours. Yara blinked. She had not expected that. A week ago, this man had tried to sideline her, dismiss her, pretend she did not exist. Now he was asking her to stay. Why, she asked. Because my men trust you. Because I trust you. Harlan's jaw tightened. And because I was wrong, and the only way I know how to make that right is to give you the respect you should have had from the beginning. It was not an apology. Harlan was not the apologizing type. But it was something close, something real, and Yara found that it was enough. I will think about it, she said. The ceremony ended. Soldiers dispersed. But before Yara could return to her quarters, a young specialist intercepted her. Kimura was grinning. That same too big smile she remembered from the morning after their conversation behind the motor pool. He was holding something in his hand, a small metal disc that caught the afternoon light. My father gave me this when I graduated Ranger School, he said. It is a challenge coin. He told me to give it to someone who saved my life someday. He thrust the coin toward her. You saved it twice. Yara took the coin. It was warm from his hand, worn smooth by years of handling. On one side was the Ranger tab. On the other, an inscription, not for self, but for country. Kimura, I cannot accept this. This is from your father, and now it is for me. Kimura's smile softened. My mom wants to meet you someday. I told her about you. She said anyone who saved her son is family. Yara closed her fingers around the coin. Family. It was not a word she had associated with the Army before. But standing here, surrounded by soldiers who had watched her fight for them, who had seen her bleed for them, she understood that family was not just about blood. It was about choice, about the people you were willing to die for, and the people who were willing to die for you. "Thank you," she said. "Tell your mother I would like that." Kimura nodded and walked away, leaving Yara alone with her thoughts. She looked down at the medal on her chest, then at the coin in her hand. Two pieces of metal that represented everything she had fought for and everything she had become. A week ago, she had been an outsider. Now, she was a Bronze Star recipient, a case study, a soldier that other soldiers would learn from. But more than that, she was part of something. A company, a family, a tradition of warriors who stood between the innocent and the darkness. If this story moved you, share your thoughts about what resonated most. Maybe you know a veteran who showed this kind of courage, or maybe you have faced a moment where everyone doubted you except yourself. Drop a comment and let us know. Yara pocketed the coin and walked toward the ridge where everything had changed. The sun was setting over the Korengal Valley, painting the mountains in shades of gold and red. Somewhere out there, the enemy was regrouping, planning, preparing for the next attack. Let them come. She would be ready. She had always been ready. She just needed the chance to prove it. And now the whole world knew what one sniper could do.